Good afternoon, everyone. You could get seated. We're going to be starting in a moment. I'm Emily Akhtarzandi, Managing Director of AtlanticLIVE, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to From the Ground Up, The Rise of Small Business, our Atlantic Festival deep dive into one of the most dynamic sectors of our economy. Small businesses fuel opportunity, neighborhood revitalization, and job creation. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, since the end of the Great Recession, small businesses have created 8.3 million, or 62% of the net new private sector jobs, matching their historic rate over the last 25 years. From artisans to tech founders, entrepreneurs of all stripes are starting new endeavors. What does the small business landscape look like today? What impact do they have on their local communities? And how are these businesses investing in their employees and building the workforce of the future? The Atlantic is going to explore what it takes for small businesses to get off the ground, survive, and thrive. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank PayPal for their support of the Atlantic Festival at large, but also of this gathering, so thank you. And a bit of housekeeping. If everyone could please silence your cell phones, but have them handy to tweet using the hashtag #TheAtlanticFest. And we'll have some time after each panel to hear from everyone in this room. So if you have questions, we'll have a person circulating throughout the room with a microphone. So think of some questions you'll have. And now let's get rolling. Please welcome the ranking member on the Senate Small Business Committee, Senator Ben Cardin, here with Atlantic Senior Editor Jillian White.
Senator, I want to start out asking what you think right now is the biggest challenge facing small business owners.
Well, Jillian, first of all, it's good to be with you, and thank you all for hosting this. I think the challenge for small businesses is the fact that they're small, so whenever they hit a bump, it's difficult for them to be able to deal with it. So now they're dealing with a new tax code. Whenever there's a challenge in the economy, they have to deal with that challenge. If credit gets tight, small businesses do not have a lot of options on how they can get resources. So I think it's really survival through difficult times and predictability. The second thing I would just add to that is, if you're a minority-owned business person or you're a woman and trying to start out, it's difficult to get the capital you need so you can succeed. Your startup chances of success are not as great. So we don't have an equal access to tools for entrepreneurship in this country. We tried to take steps to narrow that, but we're on that path. So I said we really have to pay attention to the fact that in many communities it's extremely challenging for business to be able to survive because of the lack of opportunity.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the tax code, and there's a tax reform bill that's currently in the news. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the stipulations of that and their implications for small businesses.
Well, as you know, we passed a major tax bill in this Congress. In fairness, I voted against it. I did not like the fact that it created $1.5 trillion of debt. That's going to affect programs, by the way, that will impact small businesses. So there's going to be we're going to have to pay for this at some point. But let me just, from the beginning, point out, as I said, we have to pay attention to small businesses. Small businesses don't have a lot of staff to deal with the tax code. So they're at their mercy of trying to figure out how this system works. They also need capital to reinvest. So every dollar they pay in taxes is one less dollar they have to put back in or to be able to expand their business. This tax bill was aimed at trying to help businesses in this country. The primary focus was C corporation rates, which got a tremendous reduction in rates, and it was the largest single aspect of the cost of the bill. Well, small businesses rarely take advantage of the C rate. Almost all the C corporations are larger companies. The provision that was put in for small companies is the pass-through provisions. The pass-through provisions provide some relief for small businesses. The problem is when you take a look at the total amount, and we had a hearing on this week in the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, when you take a look at who got most of the relief under the pass-throughs, it's the largest companies. The largest companies got the biggest part of the relief. So small businesses are not getting a big push from this tax bill. Some, in fact, are paying more, some are paying less, but it's not a big push. The other part that's affecting small businesses is the lack of the complexity and the lack of simplicity. It's not permanent, so it's hard to make permanent plans, but also the calculations for deductions and income are complicated, and we're hearing from small businesses the concern of the complexity on our tax code. I guess I should have mentioned that from the beginning. When you're looking at what small businesses complain the most about, it's the fact of bureaucracies and regulations and compliance with requirements, and the tax code is one of the largest requirements they have to comply with, and it takes a lot of energy away from their primary business of trying to expand their opportunities.
All right, so simplicity seems like one obvious thing that if you were creating an ideal tax reform for small businesses, that would be included. I'm wondering what other things you think would really target small businesses in a way that was actually helpful.
Well, in the tax code, you want to be able to allow small businesses to have capital. I mean, it's about having resources. So Yes, expensing is a very important provision so that they can, in fact, write off their capital in the year in which that's an important part in the tax code. Favorable provisions in the tax code for raising capital is important for small businesses. So I think it is to be mindful that for small businesses, give them a break up to a certain dollar amount. It's going to be helpful. We say we can give all businesses a break, but do something special for the smaller companies. Give them a chance. So exempt a certain amount of their income from the ordinary taxes. We did that, for example, in the craft brewing field. To let them have a break so that we see this as a growing field for small businesses. We've got to develop more in the tax code that allows smaller companies the ability to keep more of their income so they can reinvest it in their companies.
You know, you mentioned access to capital, and this is, when I report on these issues, this is probably the #1 thing that I hear, especially when I talk to women-owned and minority businesses, and it seems to be something that is perennial. It just keeps coming back. I'm wondering what you think can be done to increase access to capital, particularly for groups and entrepreneurs that tend to have a really hard time accessing funds.
Right. And we have major tools under the Small Business Administration, the 7A program, the 504 program. These are important programs we have. We have microloans, which are very important for particularly smaller companies getting started. So we have tools that are available at the federal level to help. Once again, when you look at the numbers here, the microloans have worked very well for all small businesses, including minority and women-owned businesses. But when you look at the 504 program, which is the long-term capital, or the 7A, which is the largest program we have, you find that minority businesses, women-owned businesses, are not anywhere near represented in the numbers that we would like to see. So instead, we find that those businesses tend to use the financing sources that are less predictable and more expensive, such as using your credit card. We also find that they're not as well financed on startup costs as other businesses are, and therefore, if they hit a bump, they may not survive. So it's a matter of establishing more for startup companies, particularly minority and women-owned companies.
Yeah. The retail sector in particular has been changing pretty radically. I think Business Insider estimated that in 2017, 8,000 retail businesses closed. Big box stores are having a really hard time staying open. In that type of environment, what can be done to help small businesses when bigger, more well-capitalized businesses are having such a hard time keeping their doors open?
Well, the reason small businesses are successful is they innovate. They're hungry. They figure out a better way to do things. So I'm nothing against large companies. I have a lot of large companies in Maryland. But you know 2 out of every 3 jobs are created by small business. You know that the amount of innovation, you look at trademarks and copyrights, it's multiple numbers on small businesses versus large businesses in developing better ways. That includes the service industries. That includes retail. That includes restaurants. It includes every imaginable field. They find a better way to get something done. And I'm always marvel as I go through Maryland and I see very small companies doing things that are incredibly valuable to the quality of life in our state. So as you see the large box stores having challenges, it's the smaller companies understanding the new economy, understanding the internet, understanding what people want, figure out a better way to provide those services and be able to start a business and grow a business. And it's good for our economy. 2 out of every 3 jobs are created by small business. So we're seeing that growth. And yes, it's at the cost at times of larger companies that have not been able to adjust to the realities of the consumers.
So in terms of trying to enable small businesses to be flexible and be responsive to new technology, to all of the things that can help them stay open and help them thrive, what can Congress do to help support that and enable that flexibility in them?
Congress should recognize that small businesses are unique and be prepared to do things special for small businesses. I'm very much advocating on behalf of our committee, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Our formal jurisdiction is rather limited. If you look at the legislative jurisdiction of our committee, we have some, but it's not a broad committee. We don't have jurisdiction over the tax code. We don't have jurisdiction over financial services. We don't have jurisdiction over environment. We don't have jurisdiction over labor. We don't have jurisdiction over a lot of issues that affect small business. And in each of those areas, we're trying to get sensitivity for small businesses. We already talked about the tax code, where there should be exemptions for small companies in a lot of our tax fields or our credit fields. On the regulatory front, we need to have stronger considerations of small businesses in the compliance with regulation. We did that with health care when we passed the Affordable Care Act. We need to do that in other areas to provide regulatory relief for small companies. They just don't have the personnel to be able to deal with these well-intended regulatory issues. We need the same thing on financial services. The microloans are very successful. They're very small, but they're very successful. We need to duplicate what we did in the microloans to help small businesses in some of the other programs. We were talking about several of the tax provisions we have that encourage development in different communities. Well, look at the smaller companies. Look at the smaller numbers. Again, it's not economic unless we make it so. The numbers just don't work at times. We got to make it economically feasible for smaller companies.
So I want to let the audience know that we will come to you for questions in just 1 second. So if you could start thinking about them now, condensing them all the way down, making sure they're actually questions. We have a mic runner right there. So as we look ahead to 2019, which is where my head already is, it's already October, I'm wondering what you think the #1 thing that Congress can do to put small businesses in the best position to succeed is.
Right. It's a very good question. So we are taking a look at that on our committee, working with the Democrats and Republicans. The good thing about our committee, it's not partisan. We do everything, I think almost this entire year, everything we did was bipartisan. And we intend to continue that in 2019, regardless of which party controls the gavel. So we're looking at ways that we can improve the tools that are currently available. We want to make financing easier for small companies, so we are looking at expanding the existing tools for all small companies, but as I said earlier, targeting it to underserved areas, targeting it to minority businesses, targeting it to women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and our target groups. We are also looking to try to put the sensitivity in the other committees on small businesses. So we are trying to work in the different committees to have the sensitivity for small business. So I think what we are asking is to recognize that small business need particular attention. It is tough for small businesses to get going. Now, we have a farm bill, for example. That's not quite finished yet. They're still negotiating between the House and the Senate. We have tried to put into the farm bill provisions that will help smaller farmers operations. We've done that over the years. That's an example of a priority that we have. I could go through a lot of different areas where we're trying to carve out opportunities for smaller companies. But I still think that the key issues are going to be access to capital, regulatory relief, and making it more financially viable for small companies to take risks.
All right. Do we have some audience questions? One right there.
Yes, Hank, just of your opinion of how that's going and what could be tweaked or changed to improve that, so for small businesses to raise their startup capital.
Right, and as we look at the traditional routes for financing, it's changed pretty dramatically over the last couple decades. Crowdfunding, of course, is one of those areas that we tried to correct some of the in funding today. I could say the same thing in commercial banking. It wasn't too many years ago that we had a healthy number of community banks. We no longer have that. We've seen mergers and consolidations. We find that the amount of participation by the multi-international banks in small business is nowhere near as high as community banks were participating in small business areas. So whether it's risk capital in trying to help a business get off the ground, or whether it's more conventional financing, the current financial institution demographics make it more challenging for small businesses. So we look at ways of, and that's true also for venture capitalists, and that's why crowdfunding was an interesting way to try to break that cycle that was moving away from many of our small business opportunities.
All right, I think we have another one right there.
Yes. Senator Cardin, I'm David Foster from Chestertown, Maryland, an area that I
All
know
right.
we've visited many times.
Yes.
You've recognized that small businesses have what you and your
But it does provide at underserved communities. We're looking at workforce development issues. One of the major problems that we're hearing from small business is how do you get workers? We have a tight labor market. There's many reasons for it, but we have a tight labor market. So in rural America, how do you get people to meet the needs that you need? It might be technical skills, it might be whatever. It's just a challenge. So we're looking at ways to help provide incentives for workforce needs in rural America. So these are some of the tools. We've already dealt in the healthcare front to make it a little bit easier in rural America for healthcare to be needs to be met. If we had this conversation 5 years ago, I think that would be one of the issues that would be talked about more frequently than today. I think we've made progress in that area. So we do really spend a lot of time on rural policy and how we can help. I represent Maryland. It's a great state. Everybody thinks Maryland is Baltimore and Washington. We got great rural communities in the western part of our state, on the eastern shore. I'm there frequently. They have needs. It's a wonderful way of life, but their future depends upon economic opportunity. And how do you match economic opportunity with rural America? And that's not always easy. You need a strategy. You need local leaders that develop a strategy, and then the federal government needs to come in partnership. In some cases, it's broadband. In some cases, it's highways. Some cases, it's energy. We got to help supply those needs so rural America can be competitive.
Everyone, join me in thanking the Senator.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Cardin and Jillian as well. And next, for a look at the state of small business and the conditions for growth in communities nationwide, please welcome to the stage Holly Wade, the Director of Research and Policy Analysis at the National Federation of Independent Business, Natalie Madeira-Cofield, founder of Walker's Legacy, Stephanie Landrum, the President and CEO of the Alexandria Economic Development Partnership, and to lead the conversation, please welcome Atlantic staff writer Derek Thompson.
Hi. So, in many ways, this should be a golden age of startups and small business formation in the U.S. Not only does the U.S. have a reputation for being the startup capital of the world, we're in the middle of a 9-year recovery. We have a record number of consecutive months of job creation. The economy has been growing steady Eddie now for almost a decade. And we've just had this enormous tax cut that's just been put into place, which would theoretically, you'd think, be good for business. But when you dig into the statistics, small business formation in the US doesn't look that healthy at all. In fact, it's been declining for decades. And this picture that we have of ourselves as the entrepreneurial capital of the world turns out to be a bit of an illusion. So Holly, I wanted to start with you. Tell me a little bit about the research behind this myth of America as a startup capital for the last few decades. What is the myth, and why is it mythical?
It's one of the mysteries of researchers. There are a lot of different thoughts on why this is occurring. Many of it is kind of a myriad of things that are happening that have happened over the last number of decades. One is just generations being more risk adverse, not finding opportunities that they feel are, that they can invest in and grow and those sort of things. But also when they talk about student loan issues and being in debt coming out of college, where most startups use their savings and their parents' savings and their neighbors' savings to help invest in new ventures. Those are some of the roadblocks. And then also for a number of areas, increased regulations that turn into a barrier for those starting up, not able to navigate. We survey a number of members when we ask about those who are new small business owners, and what are the biggest hurdles? A lot of it is fixed costs, and that goes to, some of the barriers with lower savings rates and being more in debt. The other one that a lot of folks have talked about is home ownership. And so having equity in your house is often a resource for small business owners, potential small business owners, in investing in startups. And with the lower homeownership rate, we're seeing less opportunities for those startups. So it is a whole host of reasons. It is still quite a mystery, but those are some of the larger areas that people are discussing.
Right, so at the national level, as the economy feels more precarious and as individuals become more risk-averse in response to a precarious economy, you have a steady decline in the startup rate. That's the national picture. Let's zero in to Alexandria, Virginia. Relatively rich suburb of a rich city. It is not necessarily the exact snapshot of the country, but let's talk about what is the most important barrier to starting a company in Alexandria, Virginia specifically.
Sure. I think most people who are thinking about starting a business or trying to identify the right place to start a business, they tend to focus on real estate, but I also think that that's because we've all been trained to think that a small business is a literal mom and pop who need a storefront. The reality is most small businesses are solopreneurs. They can work out of their home. They can work in a co-working space. They don't need real estate. And so once you change your mindset from that big barrier, which is I need to go rent an office space or a retail space, all of a sudden the leap into small business ownership seems much more doable because you've taken away that overhead cost. That could be something that everyone aspires to, whether you're running a professional services firm and you want to get to a point where you have 10, 15 people to have an office, but you don't need that from day one.
So what are the factors? My mom, for example, her name was Petra Khan. She started a company called Petra Khan International. There was a room in the basement of our house. She worked out of the room. She did communications consulting, and I didn't even really think of it as a small business. I thought of it as what my mom did while I was at school, right? If that is a surprisingly common practice that we call small businesses, even if though it doesn't have a storefront, it's just my mom at a desk, what is the most important barrier to allowing people like my mom to pursue that dream?
Again, I think it comes down to confidence. And people don't, starting a business just can seem so overwhelming. So one of the things that we try to tell people all the time, it doesn't matter if you are a woman, a veteran, a minority, a child, like a teenager thinking about starting a business. There is a free program available for all of those audiences in Alexandria, in DC, in Omaha, Nebraska. Every community has this set of resources. Some of them are provided by localities, some of them are done by the state, some of them are federal. Find those free resources, and there'll be a lot that you'll get out of it, but mostly what you'll get is confidence. You'll see somebody else that looks like you who did it and was successful. And that is that piece that people need to get over.
Yeah, I think confidence is so important. When I think about the entrepreneurs that I know, and a lot of my best friends are entrepreneurs, the most important difference between those that started companies and those of us that are within organizations is the extraordinary and visible confidence that they have about what they're doing.
That's right.
The superhuman confidence. Natalie, confidence is important, but it's not enough. And not that you were suggesting that it was sufficient. When we think about access to capital, it seems to me that there is what I think of as a paradox of opportunity, which is that people say, oh, well, the key to starting a company is getting a loan. What's the key to getting a loan? Often it's having connections that make the bank think that you're a good bet. But how do you get those connections? Like maybe that calculation is easy if you're a kid who went to private school and your parents are wealthy and your parents' friends are wealthy and your friends' parents are wealthy. But what if you aren't starting out with those connections? How do you bootstrap your way to gaining the confidence of people that have access to capital if you essentially weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth?
Yeah, so first, thanks for that question. I think in answering that, there are a few paths to go down. And I don't want to underplay the important role that self-visualization actually plays. And so a lot of times what we just heard is the self-confidence necessary to be able to start a business. For many underserved, underrepresented communities, people have not ever had the opportunity to actually see someone with a business, to even learn the process, the protocols, and the ways in which people show up in the world as an entrepreneur. And in some people's minds, that may be very flashy clothes, and other people's minds, that may not be. So I think there's that. Then I think that there's also, with the lack of visualization from a media perspective, there's a lack of actual social capital in some of these communities, which is exactly what you were talking about. If your mother didn't start a business, if your father didn't have a college degree, if you didn't go to a college period, your likelihood and your chances of being able to connect with someone in that space starts to diminish over time. I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman who was from the middle of America, and I was talking to him about why representation matters, and I said there are people who don't have a high school degree or that do, and people are still saying to them, why are you struggling with them? And he looked at me, and he was not what people would think would be the person who said this to me. He was a millennial white male who was the first in his family to ever go to college. And he said to me, I realize now that it's 4 times more difficult for me to make relationships with someone who went to college than my friends did, because they have generations of family experiences. And I really cannot underscore how important networking, mentorships, and access to relationships is in this entire formula. People do business with people that they know. People do business with people that they trust. Building trust is about building community. Building community is about building social capital. And from there, we can begin to address the financial capital challenges, which coincide. Because the truth of the matter is, when it comes to access to investment from the form of traditional investors and angel investors, people invest in formulas, and they invest in things that look like what they understand, what they know, and what they represent. And so it's important for us to be able to build more of these people in these spaces, and also for us to break the algorithms and realize that success can be born anywhere.
That's beautiful and really, really important. Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because what you said is there's 2 aspects of the power of familiarity in entrepreneurship. There's the power of familiarity on the part of the bank, that it's most likely to invest in projects that look like projects that have succeeded, right? And so you want to make your startup look like something that's already succeeded. That's why when you pitch something, you say it's Uber for X, Airbnb for Y, the high concept pitch for a new company. But there's also familiarity on the part of the individual.
That's right.
That we're more likely to pursue entrepreneurship if we know entrepreneurs, if we're familiar with that path.
That's right.
And as you were talking, it reminded me of a study that didn't even occur to me as I was preparing for this event that was about a college experiment where they had successful women who were in computer science and engineering who came in to talk to a class before they had chosen their majors. And it increased the number of female computer science and engineering majors by 20%. Just a few meetings with mentors, a few meetings with people who went down this path made people more likely to say, oh, that's a path that I can choose. So maybe just tell me a little bit more about why mentorship is so powerful. Because it seems like the sort of thing that might be sort of like a soft word, like it's not an economic term, but it's just as important as some of the economics.
So I'll share my personal journey. I actually started my first company when I was 26 years old in DC. And I was a young woman, and it didn't matter which way I sliced it, it was a good old boys network. And I constantly found myself in circumstances that were uncomfortable for me. And this was long before the Me Too movement existed to kind of have camaraderie with. And so I went home to one of my friends, and I was crying about having literally been propositioned in business that day by a man that I had a dinner meeting with, And he said to me very poignantly, Natalie, who is your female mentor? And I didn't have one. So I started emailing women that I wanted to be like, and they didn't respond. And now that I'm a busy woman, I understand it's because they're busy, and sometimes you don't have it to give to people, more energy that you don't know. But I realized that in doing In doing that, I could build a platform that would allow women to see themselves reflected. And that platform was my organization, which is called Walker's Legacy. We started with 30 women in a room because we needed to have friendship, sisterhood, and representation, in addition to all that access, right? And now Walker's Legacy is a national women's organization operating in 10 cities across the country, doing partnerships with major corporations and organizations and even, government agencies, because mentorship is so critical. I think we think education is key, and it is. You can teach people about how to build a business all day with business plan, review kits, but you can't teach people how to build friendship-based mentorships that actually turn into social capital for both people, and building those types of networks and opportunities is critical and important.
Stephanie, this seems like an issue that can be handled at the local level, that might be handled best at the local level, but also it's not something numbers-based, like, oh, let's lobby to reduce the tax on local companies by X and Y%. Let's pass this policy that gives subsidies and abatements to certain companies. It's a network of people that you have to build.
Right.
So how do you build it?
Right. So it's fascinating to hear Natalie's story, and organizations like hers draw on this idea that we all look for somebody who has something in common with us, right? We feel more comfortable, whether it's gender, lifestyle, your professional experience. What's important, though, for organizations is to pull people in who have commonalities, but then focus on teaching them how to network with people who aren't like them.
That's right.
Because the reality is you can't do business with just people who are like you. It doesn't matter what industry. Maybe there is one industry, I can't think of it, but most industries require you to deal with all types of people. And so a lot of these programs that you see at the local level, so we run one that's focused on veterans and military spouses. There's one that just opened in Alexandria that's for formerly incarcerated individuals. There are groups for women. There are groups for minorities. I mentioned earlier, we have a group that's high school kids who are starting businesses. Bring people in via commonality, but focus on that translation. How do you translate what you have in common so you can go out and be successful in the business world? There is certainly a role for localities to play in that. I think we're on the ground, and oftentimes it's something that local governments feel good about participating in. But there are tons of nonprofits who do it, and so part of it is just leveraging all the people who want to build this. I hate this word, but the ecosystem. But getting all those people together and then instituting it at the local level has proven very successful.
Yeah, I'm glad we spent time on that, because I think not only is it a really important issue, but it's an issue that economists are taking more seriously by nature of the fact, or by proof of the fact that you just had this paper coming out showing an empirical benefit to exposing young people to mentors in fields that they might not have originally been exposed to. There's another issue that is the subject of a lot of economics papers, and that is the relationship between Amazon, large businesses, and the growth of startups. Just anecdotally, I live in New York City. If you walk around the West Village, you are walking around one of the richest zip codes in the world, and you are beset with what appears to be something like urban blight. 1 in 7, 1 in 6 storefronts seem to be empty. You go along Madison Avenue, which is so rich, it's literally a metaphor for shopping in America. And again, you see empty storefront after empty storefront. There's been a lot of attempt to explain this mystery of empty storefronts in America. One of them has pointed to the rise of large companies and the power of monopolies, essentially, to withhold the startup rate. Another has been simply that a lot of shopping just isn't happening at storefronts. It's happening on couches online. So understanding that Amazon could pose both a threat to startups, but also potentially offer them an opportunity to reach consumers. Holly, what is it? Amazon, friend or foe of startups in America?
Well, of course, I'm going to have the answer of both in varying degrees. It has transitioned. When I was first with NFIB, it was the Walmart big box store effect of everything. And Amazon has filled that space, and now it's the Amazon effect and online buying. For retailers, there are certainly some of those who are having a hard time adjusting. It's become infinitely more competitive marketplace for retailers to enter and to maintain a customer base, a loyal customer base. And so for those in transition, they are changing the way that they're selling. So far more small business owners in the retail space have an online portal access for purchasing goods and services. Whether that is on the Amazon site or eBay or any of these various platforms, or developing their own capabilities. But we've seen over the past 15 years the implementation of business websites as a means to access a larger customer base is growing exponentially, and it's because of this effect with Amazon in pushing retailers to be more competitive in the online space. So with the ability to design websites that are less costly, to implement PayPal access for purchasing and having that available to them, I think is hugely important. So while it is pushing them in ways that, for a lot of retailers, that they are struggling to adapt to this new world, thankfully with the increased volume of retailers that are accessing these tools, the costs of these tools are coming down. But still the competitive issue is there. It's a challenge for a lot of folks. But they're, for many of them, they are trying to navigate their way to becoming more competitive online.
Yeah. Last question I have before we go to Q&A is, everything you said rings true to me. At the same time, if you have a storefront, a block away, then the market, the consumer market for that storefront is measured in geography, driving geography and walking geography. It is literally local. Once that company puts its website online, then its consumer marketplace isn't defined by walking distance or commuting distance, it's defined by internet access. Literally anybody in the world can shop there. Right. So as every company, local company goes online, it seems to me that you are enlarging the supply of competition for your company. Mm. So Natalie, to go to you, and if you wanted to follow up on this, that'd be fine. What have you seen in your experience of Amazon serving as either a direct threat or a direct benefit to small companies in your network?
So I won't just make this about Amazon. I'll make it more broadly about technological advancements and their impact, e-commerce in general, on small businesses. And I think there are two things. One, I think it's forcing cities to reevaluate use of empty property and vacant space. We've been here before. We were here during the manufacturing era, and cities like Detroit, my city like Rochester, New York, which is where I was raised, have had to figure out how to repurpose parcel spaces and buildings and apartment buildings and communities where people either no longer wanted to live. I think it creates a great opportunity for us to reinvigorate small businesses that are in the forms of restaurants, in the forms of other forms of service-based businesses that require human beings to be there. And that opportunity still exists. So as an entrepreneur, your job is to continue to keep trying to figure out how to innovate on top of what's happening to you. The other interesting dynamic that I have, and this is also not necessarily a negative, is that technology has allowed things to be more colorblind. In the past, if you had a storefront and you were a person of color, people knew that that was a store owned by a person of color. Now you can have a business online and no one knows who owns it. Whether a woman owns it, someone who has a hearing disability owns it. There's nothing about you, unless you put it out there, that would preclude people from doing what we do sometimes, which is implicit or unknown bias around how and whom we'll shop with. And so I think that actually presents great opportunity for people from all communities to be able to do business with all communities.
I love that point. Thank you.
I'll just give two quick examples. My answer is friend, and these are the two reasons. Number one, Amazon has turned into a company that has created a whole industry of support businesses that feed off of Amazon. So there are multiple businesses in Alexandria alone that do SEO. Essentially, if you're selling a product on Amazon, they can help you make sure it shows up quicker in a search.
SEO optimization.
Yes, SEO optimization. Thank you. So there's a whole industry of people who do that. But number two, if I decided that I was making these shoes myself and I wanted to sell them, as you were saying earlier, my area of influence was going to be very small. I can now use Amazon's platform that if I had to build it myself, my own website, the own distribution, it would take me forever and I would go bankrupt. Use their platform to sell these shoes anywhere. People don't realize how many small businesses actually sell their product on Amazon who would never be in business if they had to build that whole thing themselves. My second answer is, and this might not be very popular, Jeff Bezos was an entrepreneur, right? I mean, he is what we all aspire to be, right? We could only be so fortunate to start a business and literally have it be one of the biggest companies in the world. Are there things about the company we might not like? But why don't we look at him as a mentor, a potential mentor? He probably does not answer his email. But why is there the villainization of somebody who had an interesting idea, started a business in his garage, and turned it into something that we all know? We should, look at it through that lens.
I hear it. We have a question right there in the back. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? I really enjoyed this panel. And I was wondering if, sort of for next steps, would it be helpful, let's say, for people in this audience to, be able to give someone their name, especially if they're entrepreneurs or small business owners, to another individual, I don't know if they're here, but if they run an organization that can then connect, these folks with young entrepreneurs, they can be mentors. I'm sort of thinking about, like, what do people take away from this? I feel like, a lot of the things that were touched on is, exposing people to businesses. What's it like to run them? Exposing people to new industries. And then having, people in those industries, provide mentorship. I was wondering if you guys could comment on that, or if there's a place that folks here could go to be able to do that. I mean, not everyone here is an entrepreneur, but I feel like that would be a good first step.
Let's keep our answers short so we can move through a few.
I mean, I have to do this because you just did that. But Walker's Legacy, which is my organization, is a digital media platform designed to do just this, which allows women to be able to connect online as well as in person through our chapter communities. You can learn more about our organization at www.walkerslegacy.com.
That was quick. Good one in the corner here. Nope, I saw a point. Sorry. Nope, right here, sir.
Hi, my name is Edward Roeder. I'm with Sunshine Press Services. We mostly do investigative reporting, and I wanted to ask about the darker side of what you've been talking about. And that is, with the ease of forming a new organization, there comes a problem with fraud and phony Russian organizations. And there's nothing to prevent someone from going out of here today and forming Runner's Legacy or the ABC Corporation. And how is a small business to protect itself from phony organizations and from being taken for a phony organization, given that it has no credentials and no easy way to prove itself?
Okay, you want to answer?
Sure. Well, I can just say, so locally, we're really fortunate. The United States Patent and Trademark Office is located in Alexandria, little plug. But they have an entire program that's focused on educating businesses on how to protect not only their intellectual property, but also trademarking their identity and being able to combat false and faux I don't know what scam businesses. Fraud. People don't realize that, while the PTO is based here, they have multiple locations throughout the country, Chicago and Austin. They give free counseling, they put on workshops, et cetera. I kind of go back to my original answer. There are so many free services and advice for business owners that you can usually access through your local city. Take advantage of those things. Otherwise, if you then can have on your website that you are trademarked or that you're registered with the Patent and Trademark Office, savvy consumers will pick up on that. But that's sort of my gut answer to that question.
Just really quickly, obviously and definitely the IP piece, but then also looking at the internet as the biggest form of real estate. Your website and other social media platforms that you have for your company, you should be .comming it, .orging it, whatever it would be that people could slip of the finger and go to that and not go to your site, because that's the first piece of real estate. People want to see whether you're an actual organization. They type your name into Google and they figure that out, or Amazon and they figure that out. And so I think that that's also important as well. And then making sure that you all have all the proper documentation. So if this gets itself to the point that they're actually doing business with you, you should have things like your tax identification number that no one else would be able to have, and you should have them in a secure place that when it gets to that point, they actually shouldn't be able to transfer any funds to anyone else but you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, Stephanie, Holly, and Derek. And now a session produced by our underwriter. Please welcome to the stage Ted Parrish, the owner of ACS Home and Work, here with PayPal's Vice President and Commercial Officer for Global Credit, Daryl Esch.
How long have you been with Atlantic?
5 years?
Nice.
Yeah, a little while.
Right out of school?
No, but thank you for thinking so. No. No, I was on Wall Street for a
set up
couple
today.
of years.
So as the senator talked about some of the challenges for small businesses, one of those, of course, he mentioned multiple times was access to credit. At PayPal, our mission, what we consider the first sentence in our mission is we're here to democratize financial services. And what that really means is inclusion in the digital economy and inclusion in the digital age. And 5 years ago last week, as a matter of fact, we started a program called PayPal Working Capital. And with me here is Mr. Ted Parrish, who was a customer of that program on the very first day. So Ted has a manufacturing success story in the U.S. and a company based in Michigan. We'll get into a little more about his business in a second. But we got into this business 5 years ago because of a need, a pull from our customers. As the senator described, access to capital for small businesses never really fully recovered after the financial storm. So after the storm, lending to commercial enterprise customers kind of came back, commercial lending, but that small business client base really suffered the brunt. And this program, through this program over the last 5 years, we have distributed 500,000 individual PayPal working capital loans, totaling more than $6 billion in financing into the small business arena. So it's a program where a very simple process, and with that, it's probably actually a good place to start. So Ted, why don't you first tell the group here a little bit about your business back in Michigan?
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me. My name is Ted Parrish. I own a business called ACS, tagline's ACS Home and Work. We're a small batch textile company. We cut, we sew, we print. Kind of like craft beer, but we are craft textile, so we compete against the big textile companies coming in from China, India, the likes of that. We have 24 employees. We've been in business 16 years. We're grossing about $1.5 million a year. We started out with a $20 bill in our bank deposit and just 1 or 2 employees, and we, like I said, have 24 now. The primary thing that we work with is aprons, tote bags, and kitchen towels. That's kind of our niche. So we don't print on like t-shirts or bath towels, things like that. We found a niche market, and that's what we work with.
Great. So as I mentioned, you know, we've had 500,000 of these loans over this period, and Ted's already given me permission to indicate that he's used this program 9 times. But
yeah, exactly.
that first time 5 years ago, could you explain just like how did you come across this loan, and what was your experience using the program?
Right. Well, we made a choice early on to do some of our credit card processing. There's a lot of options out there. We use PayPal because of the security, because of the noted trust of the company. We knew our customers trusted PayPal, so we stuck with them. So we're using PayPal to process our credit cards, plus to move money and pay bills. And when I was much smaller, at that time, you pay bills a lot quicker. You're buying smaller amounts and consuming them. And one day I was on there probably buying some supplies, and I saw a banner. It said working capital. And this was in the fall when we were going into our busy season when we needed to supply our customers. And it was just a huge benefit.
And how did you actually, so as you stepped through it, how did you find the experience?
It was super easy. I was surprised because I remember one time, this was 5 years ago, so maybe 10 years ago, I was starting to notice that we're growing. I was looking at options because there were times that I would get an order and not have a way to pay for stock, and I might have tapped all my resources, so I'd call a relative and they would give me like $5,000 or something like that, and I'd pay it fairly quick. Well, it got to a point where that was hard to do, and I remember calling a traditional bank, And the guy literally laughed at me on the phone. And after that, I kind of stopped calling banks. I can be laughed at once, and I've had enough. So I just grunted through it and just did what I had to do to make it work. And then when that opportunity came, I filled out the form. And normally I wouldn't do something like that, but being PayPal, that I knew PayPal, I trusted PayPal, I've never heard of this is a crazy idea. And I don't know, 15 minutes later, we had $15,000 in our bank account. I was able to bring in the inventory because in the fall, we get busy because our customers are replenishing, getting ready for their businesses and their sales.
Yeah. And so 15 minutes later, and now, so you've used this program 9 times. The last time you used it, how long would you suspect it took you to kind of get through the process as somebody who's used it 9 times?
Maybe 15 long, and maybe even less now, because I think I don't have to fill out as much because I've worked. So it might be down to 5, 10 minutes.
I was going to predict that you are a good, responsible user of credit who reads all the terms and conditions word for word. 15 minutes. So it's been reported, by the way, it takes on average about 33 hours of administrative work for a small business owner to get a loan through a traditional loan program. So 15 minutes, actually, it is kind of on the long end, really, and of this program. But the need is so strong, and this is how part of why we're able to do this. So that 33 hours worth of administrative process that comes with the traditional system and underwriting against the personal credit, as opposed to what we're able to do with this program, is because Ted's been a customer for so long, we're able to see in real time, and we observe. We don't have to ask Ted questions about his business, about how long have you been processing, how much sales are you doing, because we see it. We're providing this service for him. So, and as a known client, we're able to actually take a lot of the information that he would otherwise be filling out in those 33 hours of paperwork and give him a much shorter online experience. And this is the kind of innovation that we need. And the reason we're able to do it is because we're able to pull this off in that online experience, a known customer. It's technology coming in and that allows us to take a lot of that cost, what would otherwise be cost out, and that's prohibitive, that's creating part of that problem around access. So this program, not in Ted's company's case, but the working capital program, has really come in and it's over-indexing in places that were banking deserts. So as we study and see where is the money going, the money is going into communities where traditional banks have pulled out 10 or more banking centers and bank branches since the Great Recession. So there's more and more volume coming in. And so when we talk about inclusion and democratizing financial service, that's what this program is doing. And I think related to that, Ted, you told me a story earlier. As your company was growing, tell a little bit about how the growth and what your traditional credit experience would have been with a more traditional provider as your business grew.
Well, the traditional credit, like a bank, and if I went in and filled out a loan, they would look at the P&L and the balance in our financial statements, but they'd also look at my personal credit information, and that would be a factor. Well, when you start out as a small business, and maybe you're doing $20,000 a year, $10,000, and you need a van, you go borrow money, you get a van, and now you got your van to make your deliveries. Maybe a year or two later, you need a piece of equipment for a couple thousand, and a lot of companies will loan you a couple, to buy the manufacturer will loan the money to buy the equipment, you do that. So 5 years later, now you want to approach a bank. Well, maybe your financials are okay, but now your consumer side's not okay because you're over, leveraged. So now you're not bankable. And that's a problem because they take the consumer side and you're lumped in with everybody else with a credit card. They don't meet payroll, they don't have balance sheets. It's not the same, but they use the same metrics.
Yeah. And then as you've grown, how have you put this to work? So how has it impacted your business?
Oh, it's been huge. Like I told you earlier, if we didn't have PayPal working capital and we had to grow it hand to mouth the way we did traditional, borrowing from family and friends, I would probably be grossing about $600,000 to $700,000 a year. And definitely because of PayPal working capital, Next year, we'll probably be at 1.6, 1.7. So I would say in the 5-6 years, we've grown $1 million. And that's added 6 to 8 employees easily because of that.
Yeah, and the session started today with discussion around how small business is the growth engine for employment in America, and it's been my privilege and our privilege to serve you in your business. And so Ted's just a great example of how manufacturing works in America, and we're proud to have been part of your journey as he's added to his point, 30% staffing increase year on year for the business. We're proud to have been a part of it. It's an honor for us, and I want to thank Ted. I want to thank the Atlantic for having us here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted and Daryl. And next, a local business leader tells his story of entrepreneurship. And on a personal note, if any of you have young children who are fans of pizza, when my son Adam, a 10-year-old, heard that I was introducing the co-founder of And Pizza, he said, "Mommy, you have the coolest job." So it's my delight to welcome the co-founder of And Pizza and the owner of Kramer Books and Ted's Bulletin, Steve Salis, here with Atlantic senior editor Jillian White. And I hope, Steve, I can get an autograph after. Thank you.
Flattered. If you'd like, I'm happy to give you one. Sure.
So I will say I, like Emily's son, was excited about this. And Pizza was kind of one of the first brands that I thought of as a DC brand when I got to DC and started this job. So just talking backstage a little, I had some idea of your background and kind of what an interesting journey it was, but it's even more fascinating than I thought it was. I'm wondering if you can share with our audience kind of the path that you took to being a successful entrepreneur.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I think it's not, it was a path. I think it's still a path. It's still a journey. And so yeah, a little background on me. I was born and raised in New Hampshire. I spent the first 20 years of my life there. I went to school on a scholarship to play basketball. I was there for my first 2 years, recognized that I was staring at an impending cliff, recognizing I was going to grow up, and 2 years thereafter I was going to be on my own, and decided to get ahead of the curve. I dropped out of college, cold turkey, much to the dismay of many of my family members, and I ended up moving to New York City, kind of apples to apples comparison, and I got to New York and literally had to block, tackle, scrap, you name it, to kind of get by. Entered the beverage business, working lounge and bars, then got into restaurants, hotels, and I actually opened up one of my first ventures in the West Village, which was a tequila bar. How fitting, as we're at a tequila establishment. And I ended up selling that business right before I turned 26, and I used the funds of that to start our pizza business. And Pizza really was birthed for, there's a couple sort of things that I think you need to know about And Pizza. So at the time in early 2010, there was this foodie emergence that was taking place where you had a lot of elevated casual and fine dining chefs that were really using pizza more as a canvas and going after world, sort of global fare and global inspirations to create these really unique pies, and everything was very expensive. And then of course in New York you have your buy the slice pizza shop in every corner, and so I felt if we could bring the speed, efficiency, and convenience of buy the slice, but with no pre-made product, and bring some semblance of quality and sophistication we could get at a elevated casual or fine dining product offering, we perhaps had an opportunity. And then of course And Pizza was born. And I was just telling Julian that the idea, though it was started in New York, quickly made a decision not to build in New York. And so we embarked on a tour and ended up in Washington, D.C. It was my last stop. Went around the entire country, literally never came to D.C. in my life, not even for a field trip. And got on the train from Penn Station, Union Station, got here, got in the back of a broker's car, didn't know the person, drove me around the market for 3 hours, got back to Union Station, kind of twirled around and looked up and said, this felt like the right place to be. And long and behold, a few months thereafter, we ended up moving here, myself and my co-founder. And we opened our first store in 2012, and today we have over 30 units in 5 states in the District of Columbia, and all company owned. So
yeah,
it's been a cool run. It's been a pretty cool run, and frankly, I always say it has far exceeded my expectations. You never really know going into anything what's going to happen. Everything's theoretical until it's actual. You could have the best business plan in the world and the tightest financial model, but at the end of the day, it never, supplants what the actualities are and having to make decisions and learning about the things that you need to do to be successful.
So I know you talked about, there was a reason DC was on your list. It had a couple of check marks. You wanted kind of an emerging market. You're not going to do pizza in New York because you're not going to bring Santa Beach. But but there's a level of that if you have never been to a city, you haven't spent a bunch of time there, you've been there for a couple hours, how much of that was just gut instinct?
A lot of it was gut, but I always say, one of my successful principles, I believe, is bringing method to madness. I think as an entrepreneur, we always are mad. We have the best ideas in the world. Things come up, and you're like, yeah, I want to do it, and you get all jazzed about it. But one of the things that I feel like has made me relatively successful is bringing a method to the madness. So in this case, there was that. There was an inclination that this was clearly a great market to be in. A lot of things were happening at the time. I believe the highest concentration of millennial consumers were here. You had like-minded concepts that were here that had a similar operating model. So from an educational perspective, we felt like we could enter and not feel like we had to overly educate. You obviously had a very stable economy even through the cataclysmic financial crisis. And so there were a lot of factors that played into it. And that and inclination, gut, call whatever you'd like, intuition, sort of the confluence of factors got us here.
Yeah. So in this time, you haven't just built up and pizza to kind of this massive multi-state thing. You also, Kramer Bucks, Ted's Walton, also incredibly successful DC institutions. I'm wondering how you thought about pursuing those other ventures and not kind of being single-minded just on and pizza, and also then branching out of food altogether.
Yeah. A lot of questions.
Yeah. All of them.
Try to take those down one by one. Well, I've always had an aspiration, perhaps is the right word, for building a highly sought-after consumer-focused platform. And not consumer by way of an individual or by way of an industry, but really using a set of principles for how we make decisions. And in part, some of the things such as Kramer Books really was an opportunity that fell on my lap. The bookstore was going to close in 2 years from when I bought it, so actually it was going to close this year. It was founder-owned and founder-led. Going through some hardships. And one of the things I think is unique about me is I'm a founder, I'm an investor, and I'm an operator. So being able to wear those hats I thought was really instrumental in figuring out a way to make the Kramer deal work. And I feel a tremendous sense of stewardship. It's been a challenge. It's been a great learning experience for us. But I really feel excited about Kramer's. And I think Kramer's has its best years very much in front of it. I think when you look at where the world's going, the actual mechanics of the model are very progressive. With a food and beverage and a retail operation as a sort of a hybrid model. And I would view those more as hubs, and I think you're going to see a lot more of those. And so mechanically speaking, felt good about the model. Ted's is another one. It's funny, I was taking people to Ted's when I first moved to DC. When I first got here, I was like, I got to go to Ted's. I'd bring my family, I'd bring my friends. The one on Capitol Hill at the time when I moved here, and didn't think I'd be owning the business, a handful of years later, but I think just having a knack for things that we want, going into industries we feel like we can disrupt, whether it's books or pizza or modern American food, barbecue as well. Clearly industries where there's a tremendous amount of consumer acceptance already, but just thinking about things a little bit differently and pushing status quo and being okay with disrupting. And it's worked for us. And those principles also apply to my home business as well, because I know you just brought that up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What has been the most challenging part of trying to build a business in DC?
Well, I think for starters, nothing ever happens on time, nothing ever happens on budget. So for those of you who are thinking of starting a business, make sure you have a good contingency plan in place. Make sure that you have a good plan for what you're trying to do and give yourself room to pivot. I think it's really important. DC is a really interesting place, right? I mean, you have the national government and the local government, really meddling in the same sandbox. There's a lot of challenges, I think, that business owners face here in DC. And, I think it's just about learning the ins and outs of how the world works. The way you would get things done in DC 5 years ago or 6 years ago when I first got here and today is very different. So I think it's just constantly making sure you have your finger on the pulse, how to handle, the governmental related elements. I think on the workforce side, clearly we're at record lows on unemployment. Mm-hmm. For us, we're really manic about the people we bring into our business. Our people are our brands, and so the workforce is tighter today, but that's okay. We run a really tight process, so clearly workforce is a tough thing. They have rising occupancy costs right now. That's also really tough, especially for a guy like me, where a lot of my holdings are in retail. So you have rising wage rates, rising occupancy costs, tougher restrictions in doing business, but you just try to find a way to get it done. And It's not easy and it's usually not pretty, but as long as you can get to the end of it, it usually ends up working out.
Yeah, there's been a lot of kind of debate in DC over the tip minimum wage and worker wages. I'm wondering if that's something you guys have weighed in on.
Well, I tend to stay away from political matters because I'm apolitical, but I'll tell you this. If we have a lot of people that work in our company. We have a lot of tip wage employees that work in our company. And if I were to, and I have done this before, ask them, hey, I'd love to put you in a leadership role. You get a fixed salary and you get all these benefits. And they ask you, so how much is that? And I give them the number and they go, oh, hell no. They like what they're doing. And so, look, the tip wage thing to me is, I'm a big believer in don't break something that doesn't need to be broken, but I am a big believer also in making sure we're constantly striving. I think anything can be amended, enhanced, tweaked. In the case of this, I believe that those things hold true. I think full disruption and eradication and a full pivot, I'm not entirely sure I'm a big believer in that.
I want to let the audience know we are going to come to you for questions. I'm sure you have plenty of them. You've already heard my spiel. You know my rules. So start thinking now and get your hands up. So one of the things that I think makes local businesses in particular really successful is when they find a way to really integrate into the community and think about their place in the community and how they interact with people. That seems to be something you guys have thought a lot about.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if you can just take me through your thought process on that.
Yeah, that's a deep question. Well, let's use the First Damn Pizza on 8th Street. I can sit here and tell you today that I'm really, really adamant that if not for opening our First Damn Pizza on 8th Street Northeast, I'm not entirely sure we'd have the same business we have today. We entered a community that was going through transformation. We felt like we were playing a small role in that transformation process. And being that it was gentrifying, we created a safe haven for all of our consumers. Didn't matter where you came from, what you did, how long you were in the community for, whether you're new or old. None of that stuff mattered. And I think taking that a step further, all of our brands, we really think about the communities we go into. We want to interwoven our fabric into the community. I think it's always a challenge when you have scalable enterprises to maintain a spirit and a soulfulness about your brand. But I think we do a pretty good job of tempering, not getting too big or feeling too big while maintaining that entrepreneurial spirit. And usually what we see happen in our outputs when we build locations is really thinking about how we can build a store that is really representative and indicative of what that community is, where it came from, why it's where it is, where it potentially is going, and making some decisions about how we can play a role in that. And it goes beyond just the four walls. Clearly we can sell pizza or sell books, but it's also serving your community beyond the four walls. And we're really adamant about doing everything we can to really try to enhance the communities beyond just making it a transactional element, because that's not really something we're interested in doing.
Yeah. All right. Do we have some audience questions? I see one right all the way in the middle, so sorry.
Bless you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mike Hardiman. I'm a fan of In-N-Out Burgers, which is a cult in the Western United States. But they're also all company-owned stores. So my question is, how did you, cash flow borrowing, how did you finance the expansion?
So we were fortunate, I think I mentioned earlier, from a transaction I had in New York and my co-founder, we collectively pooled our own funds. It's funny, no one wanted to invest in Amp Pizza, and I think you have to understand this. We had a test kitchen in New York, and we tried to raise money, and no one gave us 1 cent, not 1 cent, okay? And we ended up pooling our funds. And I'll tell you what, we pulled the funds, and it definitely made it for a challenge because you're going all in. And I think in entrepreneurship, you got to go all in to make it work. Specifically as it pertains to how we scaled, it was just really thoughtful financial engineering. We grew really quickly. We have a unique operating model with that business as an example where we don't need hoods and things like that, so we can take more real estate and have more choice. But we started out bringing an SBA loan. That helped us get from stores 2 to 5 or 6. Then we brought in small amounts of outside capital, and now today we've raised about $80 million of debt and equity for that company.
I think there was another question right
there. By the way, one last thing I have to say. Everybody that had the opportunity to invest, all would love to invest in the business, and that's how it goes sometimes. But
can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Phil McCauley. You spoke a little bit about the government challenges, in particular with your businesses. So from a government standpoint, what are some opportunities or room for growth that, especially at the local market, as somebody in the background of local government, what are some opportunities that we can do to help small businesses grow?
Good question. Well, it starts at the top with leadership, making sure that we have good leadership in our governmental agencies, and making sure that the agenda is clear. Making DC a place where everybody and anybody that wants to build a business has an idea as to how to build that business. I think that everyone leads different paths in order to get to that net or that end result, and I think that that's troublesome. I do think the market has obviously been a hotbed for fostering certain brands. I'm fortunate that I'm part of one of those brands that has clearly expanded beyond the marketplace, but doing business here is very challenging, and I think in order for, and I think that actually, frankly, I think DC has a long way to go. So happy to talk to you offline as far as some of my general thoughts, but I think those are a few things I would start with, and creating a definable process for how people start and get to the end result of opening up a business.
And I'm a reporter, so I have to ask if you want to give us a scoop on what your next big business move is.
Ooh. So, well, we just finished our homes. One of the first developers in the country to build homes using aerospace robotics. Really big fan of that. Amazon actually just made a big investment into modular home development last week. So I feel like that potentially could be an interesting path for us. We have a lot of news coming up. I can tell you that we will be introducing a brand new consumer platform focusing on commerce and culture. It will effectively be a hybrid B2B, B2C platform that will interface with all of our brands. And I'm very excited to introduce that here probably some point later this year.
Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve and Jillian. And now a look at the path to starting a small business and helping it thrive with 3 small business leaders. Deanna Dorsey is the founder and CEO of the District of Clothing. Tiffany Gatlin is the founder and CEO of Atlanta's Latched and Hooked. And Megan Ogilvie is the CEO of Dog Tag Inc. and Dog Tag Bakery. And to lead the conversation, please welcome the managing editor of The Atlantic, Adrienne Green.
Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
Hello. We're here to talk about small business, so I want to start off on a really practical note. What's the hardest part about starting a small business? Is it amassing capital? Is it confidence? What is it?
Well, my business is a beauty company. I actually sell hair extensions. Hair extensions in the African-American community is $1 billion industry. So women of color will likely spend more money or spend money first on their hair before they actually pay their mortgage or take care of any responsibilities that they have. So I would say one of the first things that a business owner has to think of is, how am I going to let people know about my business? How do I get my business out there, especially when it's grassroots and you're building organically? For me, social media has been at the crust of me building. I started off as a blogger. Once I came out of corporate America, I worked at Bank of America for almost a decade, and I was an assistant vice president of small business and consumer banking. So I was able to take my knowledge from corporate America, and marry that into entrepreneurship, and also take the experience that I had as a blogger and the influence that I had there, and really help to amplify my voice to help me build.
Deanna, how about you?
I think the hardest thing with getting started is actually getting started. Oftentimes it's just self-doubt. We sort of talk ourselves out of things, and you say to yourself, well, I don't have capital. I don't have access to venture capitalists. I have this idea, but maybe I don't know enough about it. I don't know where I can get started. I need to make sure I have a bank. There's just so many things that we're constantly talking ourselves out of. I often think the hardest thing is getting started. You don't need a business plan to start a business. Yeah. You don't need $1 million to start a business. You need an idea, and you need the determination to make that happen.
So those other things you do need eventually, though. So it's once you kind of take that first step, did the rest of those things fall into place? Was it a struggle gaining capital or making the relationships that you needed? Talk a little bit about that.
So Dog Tag Inc. is a nonprofit, and so we use a bakery as a living business school to teach entrepreneurship and small business to veterans that have service-connected disabilities, military spouses, and military caregivers. So we have a bakery that's, a fresh bakery, scratch bakery right in Georgetown. Come on down. But above it's a classroom, so our fellows take courses with Georgetown professors. They gain a certificate in business administration from Georgetown. And then at the same time, we're using our bakery to actually teach them the experiential learning of running a small business. So when we first started, we started both a nonprofit and essentially a for-profit at the same time. Wow. And I think, really kind of to touch on the point is that, in entrepreneurship, if you know you have a good idea, it's really the persistence to keep going. And I think half the battle is showing up every day.
Yes.
And half of the battle is knowing that, you know it's going to work, and you have to have that persistency, that determination. And it is building the network, though, right? It's finding your tribe in different ways. It's pounding the pavement, getting the word out, and then finding those that can start supporting you. And you don't know. It's crazy. You can go to different events and you don't know how it'll turn out. You don't know who's going to be that one connection. But it takes that determination and showing up every single day. And as you do that, it just takes one. It just takes one, either one investor, one donor, and that can be the game changer. But if you stop showing up, that's when it all goes downhill.
You talked about finding your tribe, and I think that that's a really interesting concept because I think mentorship and entrepreneurship go kind of hand in hand. Did you guys have mentors? How are you thinking about mentoring other people? It sounds like at Dog Tag that's a pretty baked-in part of the experience, but I'm interested to hear from all of you about how mentorship has played into your success.
Mm-hmm. I think for us, the entire community of District of Clothing, we are here to encourage dreamers and doers and change makers and future history makers. So it's almost like a self-mentoring community. Through the t-shirts that we have and the apparel and the other hats and so forth, the other products that we have, it's sort of a fashion activism statement to continue helping people to move forward and to get out of their own way and to make their dreams a reality. I also do some mentoring through some local schools here, especially the Archbishop School in Washington, D.C., Archbishop Carroll, excuse me. And a couple of my mentees over the last 4 years have started their own businesses. They realized that they wanted extra money for sneakers, or they wanted extra money to attend a concert that maybe their parents wouldn't or were unable to pay for. And so one of my mentees started his very own baking company. He's like, well, I know how to bake, and I'm gonna bake and sell cookies, and that's what he's doing right now. And it also helped him get into college. He was able to write about that in his, one of his letters, excuse me. And seeing that, I think, seeing other people do what they are inspiring or hoping to do is a form of mentorship in itself as well.
And I think, so obviously my company sells hair extensions, but at the core of my business, it's about giving women self-confidence or giving them their confidence back. I've had many women who have said, I have gone through postpartum hair loss. What woman hasn't dealt with that, no matter what color, race you are? I've had women who have battled cancer. We're in October, so it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so my hair extensions has helped to give women their confidence back and to, just make them feel beautiful. And so at the heart of my business is always about giving back. And another example is I have these two beautiful ladies here. They attend Howard University. Howard University actually contacted me and asked if they could take me on as a client. So I am their client today, and they are PR majors. And it's very important for me to give back to students so that they can, too, see how their track as they're going, as they're going through education, if is this something that I really want to do? So they're full on today. They have to be my publicists, and they have to do everything that PR professionals do. And so that's just, another example of how I give back so that they, too, when they get to be in their profession, that they also will give back.
Megan, talk a little bit about the veterans and kind of the experience for transitioning from the military.
Yeah, so in the veteran sector, and when I talk about the veteran population, I will also include military spouses and military caregivers. It's a real key element. We have about 230 service members that are transitioning from the military to the civilian workforce every year. So 2013 to 2019, that'll be 1 million. Today, about 6%, or I'm sorry, about 26% of those that are transitioning out are interested in entrepreneurship and small business. Only 6% actually go into it. Versus in World War II, post-World War II, 49% of veterans actually were small business owners. So it's a crazy statistic in recognizing that mentorship and lack of the ability to understand the financial connections is the key element to that. We recognize that 9.1% of all small businesses are veteran-owned, so it's about 2.5 million businesses, which then employ 5.5 million. So the fact is that only 6% of our current veterans are actually getting out and starting a small business. Think about if we could empower them. And again, it's really through this mentorship of if you can see it, you can be it. And I think the panel previous to this really kind of talked about that. So what we try to do is we actually try to not only bring Georgetown professors in for the ability to get the foundation in business, and that has its own mentorship, but really we're bringing local business owners, we're bringing entrepreneurs, we're bringing in small, as well as corporate, but to really tell their story of, I worked in as a law firm, and I realized I wanted to make ice cream every day. And so what I did is I quit the law firm, I invested in my own ice cream company, and now it's Ice Cream Jubilee here in DC. And the goal is she has 2 brick and mortars. We partner with ice cream sandwiches, but our fellows need to hear
bring
that.
us any.
I know, I mentioned that. Product is all at the bakery, come on by. But I think what we want to really show is that, everyone has their own purpose and their own path, but it's, you don't have to take it alone. So what we're trying to do is build this tribe within each cohort that goes through our program, bring in partners, bring in those mentors, and empower them to take advantage of it, right? And I think in entrepreneurship and small business, no one's looking for the handout, right? Everyone's willing to work hard, but sometimes it's just a hand up. And in the veteran population, it's a really key element.
Each of your businesses really deal with communities that are in need. And for small businesses, margins are slimmer, access to capital is always a perpetual challenge, and it's often hard to think about anything other than the bottom line. How do you build in, doing social good into your bottom line? How do you, make this commitment to impacting your communities a part of, an integral part of your businesses?
Well, one thing in my particular business and my community, I wanted to build in a health aspect. I noticed that women of color would sacrifice working out and fitness because they didn't want to get their hair messed up. You just get your hair done. I might have about a week before I can hit the gym because I don't want to get my hair sweated out. And so a few months ago, I partnered with SoulCycle in Atlanta, and we did an event called Hooked on Fitness. And they allowed us to come in and do a complimentary spin class. And the purpose of that was to help and teach women that you can still work out. There are ways that you can preserve your hair, and you can still stay fit and active and have a healthy lifestyle. And our goal was to help them to understand how to properly care for their hair and know that you can still, do that. And it didn't take money to do it. It took me actually being able to talk to the owners and being able to help them to understand how it fits in. So a lot of times you don't have to think that everything costs money, but you have to be able to explain your vision.
Also, I think it's something that we should really sort of discuss here on this panel. I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say. Consumers today are belief-driven. Purchasing today is very belief-driven. And so we've partnered with Planned Parenthood, we've partnered with the Washington Area Women's Foundation in helping them to expand their mission and their reach. And also because we are in support of their mission and their reach, it helps us to continue building and growing, and then it's also just a direct reflection of our beliefs, and it helps build our community out as well. If people trust and believe in our brand, and they're going to continue rocking with their brand. And the T-shirts for Planned Parenthood say Stand with Black Women, and the T-shirts for Washington Area Women's Foundation say Stand Together, and they are just a very true depiction of how we believe, The Sugar Clothing believes as an organization, that we need to stand together as a people, especially in this time.
Each of you kind of obviously are women running small businesses, CEOs. What are the challenges that are particularly marginalized communities, women run, people of color, do they face in starting businesses that might be different than the broader population?
I think capital is always at the forefront of a lot of business owners' minds. For me, definitely. I mean, I've been on both sides. I've worked in an organization that generally lends money in a more conservative way. And now that I'm an entrepreneur, trying to get access to capital is difficult. But it's, with organizations like PayPal, who have, I was able to get 2 working capital loans through PayPal, and it made it a lot easier for me as a small business owner that had been in business less than 2 years to be able to do a lot of things that I need to do, which is build and excel pretty fast based on the business model that I had. And I was moving very fast. My business was growing. I needed more access to capital. I needed more products to extend to my consumers. And, I think that there are, other companies that are starting to catch on to similar business models like PayPal. So I think that it's out there, but I think a lot of work needs to be done to be able to, for small business owners to get access to capital as a woman of color, as a woman-owned business. I think there's still a ways to go.
And part of that is also, before you even get the access to capital, you have to build these relationships. So it's having access to the room, or having access to the dinner, or access to the invitation to whatever the event is. I think that's probably been one of the more challenging portions of this here in Washington, D.C. There are lots of small little communities that you just don't always have access to. There's lots of small communities that you don't know exist. And so the more that you're able to build relationships and create build partnerships and create friendships and allies with other organizations or other people, many of whom don't look like you, that helps you sort of get into these doors and navigate to get the access to the capital too.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, no. I mean, in some ways, I went from working in finance in New York to moving down to D.C. to help start Dog Tag. And so, when you're going to the Pentagon or you're going to military bases and there's like a general standing in front of you, I wear higher heels. I have a stronger handshake, and I think you have to like fake it till you make it in a lot of ways. And for how, I bring Dog Tag to the forefront is I talk about it as being good business. This isn't a charity, you're not doing a good thing. This is good business. And I think, even our fellows really face challenges. Our military spouses, they have an unemployment rate of 20%. They're constantly in a state of recession, and like 77% of them say they don't acknowledge themselves as a military spouse when going through employment or starting a business because it has a negative effect on them. So what we try to, in that same conversation is recognizing how do you facilitate that conversation? How do you actually break them out to make sure that they're not just talking about themselves as a military spouse, but as, as Megan, as Sarah, as John. And I think, the challenge of being from a very specific culture of the military to transitioning to a very different culture of the civilian workforce is something that we, for 5 months, really break down those barriers to really allow our fellows to find their voice. And I think in starting our own businesses or nonprofit, you also have to find your own voice and what your values are. And that's how you have to attend everything, and you have to force your way into those conversations, not just because saying I'm a military spouse or I'm a woman that runs an all-women nonprofit, which we are. It's saying we do good business.
Right. I want to talk about kind of 2 competing narratives as far as references to small businesses. One that we've talked about here, which is that there's never been a better time and all we have to do is take the first step, and that there's a willing and excited market to take advantage of. The other is that there are, these large corporate behemoths like Amazon that are eroding opportunities for small businesses. What is what you're seeing in Atlanta and in DC? How does that track with those narratives? Is, Amazon a threat to your businesses? Are you finding that small businesses in general thrive? What are you seeing?
Well, I know it's specifically in Atlanta. I know it's a little bit different in DC. I mean, Georgia is about, I think, the second fastest growing state for small business owners, especially for women. And so and I know Amazon has, Georgia, Atlanta has been a very big topic for Amazon because they were moving some of their headquarters there. And I know a lot of small business owners, you know, felt a little uneasy about that. Me specifically, I mean, I have e-commerce, you know, but Amazon is a threat only in the sense of just what's being able to be sold, you know, on the platform. I've seen where my product and my pictures have been taken and put on, you know, that platform to be used to sell other products. That concerns me, you know, so I don't know how, you know, things like that, the regulations with that, and how as a small business owner we can protect our products that we create and make so passionately. You know, I don't want to see my products being sold there, you know. But for me, I have a little bit of a different perspective just from, you know, just the access from like other countries have to our products over here. Just like Instagram and Facebook and all of that makes it so easy to be able to access our products, say like from China, you know. And because I do a lot of business in China, you know, my products are made there. But what concerns me is being able to protect my ideas. So for me, you know, that's kind of a challenge and something that on a regular basis I have to deal with.
I think you're right in terms of it being a matter of perspective. I've set up my platform. Dish-Good Clothing is sold primarily online. And I set up the platform to be able to integrate with Amazon when I'm ready. So when I'm ready, I click the switch, make a couple of phone calls, and I'm ready to integrate with Amazon. I hope that if they do happen to come here, that they are hiring local people, because that will also enhance and strengthen my community, and then I can continue. Maybe I can, you know, I'll be in a better position to hire someone, and they'll be in a better position to purchase, and it'll be a win-win. But I think one of the first things I learned in entrepreneurship is that it's all about perspective, and you have to make small pivots every day to make things work best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask one more question to you ladies before I take audience questions. We talked a lot about what small businesses can do for their communities. What do entrepreneurs need from their communities to continue to thrive?
Prayer.
You know, for us, what we see our bakery as is as a way to bring our community together. And so before we even moved in, or even started construction, the first thing we did was we met with the community. We met with those that lived in the area. We met with them to tell them what we were doing. Because one, we wanted them to be part of it, but we also need them to be part of it, right? And so I think encouraging the community support by, you know, attending every day or participating in different ways, coming in for a cup of coffee. I mean, every day they're supporting what we do. You know, with Amazon, there's going to be ability to sell your products online, but people will always need a place for community. And so we want to be it not just for the veteran, you know, population, but also for that. So I think it's making sure that, you know, like you said, people are buying things because there's purpose behind it. And so making sure that they know they're part of something bigger than themselves, I think actually encourages those, and almost, you know, it's where business is going, you know, in general.
I always, like, my motto has always been that the consumer buys why you do it, not necessarily what you're doing, because there's so many businesses out there that are creating the same thing. Like, they could just, you know, they have options. But I think that the story behind why you're doing it always attracts the consumer. And I think when you say, what do we want from the community, is a little bit of a heavy burden, because, you know, it's a two-way street. Like, you can't expect your consumer to buy from you, but you're not giving anything in return. So for me, being that I am an e-commerce store, unlike you, I don't have a brick and mortar, it's very critical for me to create relationships where I can touch and feel and talk to my customer on the ground. So it's very important for me to, you know, maybe do a pop-up shop, you know, in my community, or like when I did the Hooked on Fitness, the opportunity to engage with my consumer and offer them something that they didn't know existed. So what I want from them is obviously their business, but I also have to expect that I give something to them so that they continue to want to patronize me.
Absolutely. I think if I have time, I think for us it's just keep moving forward. I'm inspired by people who have dreams and they make them a reality. That inspires our products and our continual brand narrative, and so the more I can continue seeing people do the things that they want to do, the more I'm inspired to do that as well.
Absolutely. Do we have any questions from the audience? One in the back.
Nobody has a question.
we
stood up here all this time and nobody has a question.
That's hilarious.
Hi, my name's Kevin. DC City Council wants to do an opt-out for renewable energy instead of opt-in. Would that help with branding? Every business here could be called a green business if that passed. Or are there any other kinds of, like they're trying to do Family Leave Act in DC? Do you think things like that would help with the branding?
Could you ask that question a little bit more loudly? Sorry.
Sorry, the electric bill would have an opt-out policy for renewable energy instead of opt-in. So every business would be a green business if it passed. Do you think things like that would help your business?
So I actually have been thinking about how to add a green component to my product. Ironically, I was sitting at home and I'm thinking like, I wonder if I could make because my product is all synthetic fibers. I don't use any human hair production, so I'm not cutting anyone's hair off. Everything is synthetic fiber. So I do think about, when you're finished with this product and you throw it away, how is that affecting our environment? So yeah, I am, and if I figure it out, I might be rich, even richer.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies, so much.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Deanna, Tiffany, Megan, and Adrian, and thanks to all our speakers and moderators this afternoon, PayPal for its support of the festival and this program. And next, we'd love if all of you could join us for a reception starting right here, right now, at Rosa Mexicana behind you. So thank you for joining us. Take care.